Good afternoon to you, Paul. Always a pleasure. Can I start with the notion Mark Rowley said there is no law to ban protest? Is that true? Because I thought we had Section 13 of the Public Order Act, which would specifically allow us to do precisely that. What's the truth?
Yeah, good afternoon. I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation where existing legislation has been diluted and isn't being practically applied. You know, I think on the basis of the existing protest marches that have happened where people have displayed or chanted or waved flags that support Hamas and Hezbollah, which are both prescribed organisations under the Terrorism Act, in the same way that the IRA is. I think if a bit of preparation was done, there could be a compelling argument put forward that would allow this protest to be banned.
OK, so with that in mind, why hasn't that happened? I mean, when you look at the Public Order Act, it specifically states if there is a risk of serious public disorder, serious criminal damage or serious disruption to the life of the community, then they can be banned. Well, we've seen a 650% boom in anti-Semitism. We saw 29 arrests at the weekend, some for racial aggravation. Surely that threshold has been reached, Paul.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you've got the Jewish community that's living in fear at the moment. You've got the potential for there to be conflict between the veterans community and on this, the most sacred of weekends. For once, it's about time that the police stood up and said, no, we're banning it. And you know what? We'll put it in front of a court and let them decide, rather than taking this arbitrary decision about talking about a high threshold and it's not met, etc. You know, this is just a recipe for disaster, and I think that high threshold might be reviewed in the near future should something happen.
And Paul, to be fair to the marchers organisers, they said that they will go nowhere near the cenotaph, they'll go nowhere near the Armistice silence on Saturday. Their routes will be 3 hours later. The question is, though, do we believe them? And anyway, if the organisers say that you can't control the whole mob, as somebody who spent your career at Scotland Yard, if something does happen on Saturday, which nobody wants, how damaging do you think that will be to the police, having stood aside and allowed this to happen?
I think at this stage, with the public confidence in the police as it stands at the moment, it would be absolutely devastating. I'm a firm believer that the public wants to see the police, and I'm a firm believer that the vast majority of the UK public is absolutely horrified at this, that they're choosing to do this on the most sacred of weekends. Free speech isn't free, and this weekend reminds us of that.
Paul, if we sort of agree then that they're not going to ban this, and by the way, where is Sadiq Khan? Isn't he the de facto Police and Crime Commissioner of London? Not a dicky bird out of Khan on this. He's normally not shy of a word or two. But if we can say, OK, we've gone too far, this won't be stopped now, what would you do? As a former Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector, would you put a ring of steel along Whitehall? Would you completely ring-fence the area off? What do you think is the best compromise at this late stage, Paul?
I think the best compromise at this stage is very, very visible policing presence around this march and physical obstructions put in place to prevent them from going anywhere near where they're going to cause offence. And at the same time, a very robust approach taken to anybody that starts calling for jihad or supporting a prescribed organisation. The time's come for this to stop.
But isn't part of the problem, Paul, is that the police say, well, actually, the word jihad can have several different meanings. It doesn't necessarily mean let's have a holy war. And do you feel for the poor Bobby on the beats who really doesn't know what they're doing because the kind of command from up above seems to be all over the shop?
I absolutely have the utmost sympathy for the guys and girls that are going to be on the front line, because repeatedly they've been let down by their senior officers and thrown to the wolves of late. And I think that, you know, the sad reality is that they're not given the tools they need to do the job. And that is the senior management's fault. You know, there's existing legislation. We can argue about the meaning of jihad, but do you know what? Let a court do that on Monday, after they've been taken out of circulation and after our weekend of remembrance has been allowed to proceed peacefully.
And Paul, do you think things such as when the Metropolitan Police or some of the officers were taking the knee to Black Lives Matter during those protests, we saw people clamber onto the cenotaph and set fire to the flags during that disgraceful scenes. The police seemed to just stand aside. They weren't protecting the cenotaph. They weren't protecting the Churchill statue, which of course was vandalised. Do you think that soft policing then is kind of why we're in this quagmire now?
I was absolutely disgusted by that. You know, the police officers take an oath of allegiance to be impartial and to enforce the law regardless, and they just didn't. And it has been well proven time and time again that the biggest prevention of crime is the fear of being caught. And if you've got police officers engaging, not so long ago we had a female member of staff openly supporting Palestinians on duty in uniform. And that is just unacceptable. You're there to be apolitical. You're there to enforce the law fairly and firmly. And if you've not been allowed to do that for years and years, we end up in this position where nobody's bothered about coming down to London and causing aggro. They're just going to do it because there's absolutely zero fear of the consequences.
Well, Paul, you've taken the words out of my mouth. Policing without fear or favour used to be the holy oath of policing, but I see a policing community that are policing with fear. They're afraid of being called racist and they are favouring certain communities. How badly do you think that bond of the core element of policing has been broken by the modern policing management?
I don't know how much further the pendulum can swing before it snaps. And I say that with serving family and I say that with serving friends, and they are absolutely petrified of doing anything. The culture now seems to be giving you 99 reasons why you shouldn't do something, as opposed to the one moral outstanding reason why you should. And that can be applied right away across modern policing now. They're running scared. They're too scared to do anything in case they get thrown under the bus or investigated for 2 or 3 years, sidelined or whatever it is. And it's just ruined that very core part of policing, which was the Bobby on the beats initiative, their ingenuity, their training, their knowledge and their ability to exercise discretion or not whenever they needed to. And that's what made the British Bobby famous throughout the world. And we've gone from a position where we were internationally renowned to, quite frankly, being a bit of an embarrassment.
And Paul, I know it must hurt you to say that. You know, I can see the pain on your face when you have to admit such a thing. When Rishi Sunak says that he will hold Mark Rowley accountable if this doesn't work out, if Rowley's stance to kind of go soft on this, to stand off, comes to pass and something does occur, what does that accountability look like? What would you like to see? Is that the immediate sack for him?
Well, this is what needs to be understood. Unfortunately, Sir Mark Rowley's boss is Sadiq Khan. Where is he? So Rishi Sunak can complain, can criticise, can say he's going to be held accountable, but ultimately the hire and fire of Sir Mark Rowley is Sadiq Khan, and I think we all know which side he stands on.
OK, well, Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector Paul Settle, thank you for an impassioned and from the heart defence. That was superb. Thank you very much.